Hello everyone, and welcome to my full conversation with Caroline Macfarland. Caroline is the founder and executive director of Covey Think Tank, and Covey is the first crowdsourced and visual think tank. It's based in Somerset House in London. Caroline was previously the managing director at a think tank called Respublica, and she was an advisor to the Big Lottery Fund, the largest charitable funder in the UK. Caroline was also named one of Management Today's 35 Women Under 35 for her innovative work in the think tank world and determination to revive the concept of the common good through her work with Covey. Caroline and I discuss political tensions, the issues that millennials are facing entering the workforce today, and also her definition of success and how that's changed through her journey to working in think tanks. We also discussed some of the problems and difficulties that she encountered in building an organization from the ground up. Please enjoy my conversation with Caroline Macfarland. Hello everyone, today I am at Somerset House in London, and I'm talking with Caroline Macfarland. She's the director and founder of Covey, which is short for Common Vision, and Covey is the first crowd-funded and visual think tank. So we're going to talk to her a little bit today about how that think tank was developed, what the process was like, and a little bit about her definitions of success and how that's changed through her professional and personal life. So thank you so much for talking today, Caroline. So I was just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your educational background, what led you into working in think tanks?
Well, I did a politics degree at university, and I did that because I thought it was a good thing to know generally in the world, and I never wanted to work in anything related to politics or policy. So it was a little bit of an accident, really. My career ambitions were originally to go into PR and communications because I thought that the way you communicate ideas is the way in which you change the world, and so much of our society depends on comms and messages, and then I did sort of work in that field for a while, and what I found lacking on that side of things was the ideas and actually being able to be creative about your own ideas and have kind of really interesting research and policy sort of intervention. So that's what led me into think tanking originally. Yeah.
And so you started Covey basically from the ground up, and just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that process was. Sort of how did those ideas generate? How did you start to realize them? That's a really complicated process, but just something, along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the factors behind founding Covey was my experience in the more conventional think tank world, and the fact that a lot of time and effort and goodwill is spent on doing lots and lots of really interesting work behind closed doors, and then sharing that with a wider audience, with a public audience, really only happens at the end of the process. So people will sit and do really interesting bits of research for 6 months, a year. They'll talk to some really sort of knowledgeable people about that, whether it's from the world of academia or the world of politics or the world of business, and then they'll use that information and translate it to sort of a wider public output. But in the sort of world of Wikipedia, where we're all really used to having sort of access to knowledge and information directly, it seemed like such a waste to do the process behind closed doors and then make the output public. So as much as possible, we at Covey try to make the ideas generation process publicly accessible, as well as what comes of it eventually. And so that was the main thing. It also seems a shame to have all of that effort and hard work being put into the end deliverable of a 50-page report that no one really eventually reads. So that's why we build in kind of visual and digital channels and methods into everything we do. I think the idea is the medium is the message as well. If we're trying to engage people with what would otherwise sometimes be complex and technical and sometimes elitist subjects, then we want to do it in a kind of accessible way.
Yeah. And one of the premises of Covey is sort of reviving the concept of the common good. So that's a really unique idea for think tanks, as I can see. So can you just sort of explain what how you define the common good, how Covey is seeking to revive it?
Mm-hmm. The common good's a concept, an intellectual concept that dates back to Aristotle and has some of its heritage in faith-based thinking, Catholic social teaching, for example. But I think it applies to something far beyond that heritage, especially because we live in a world where people are less affiliated with traditional institutions or conventional social divides.
Mm-hmm.
So I think applying the common good to politics is something which is responsive to the ways in which people don't have those traditional allegiances anymore, and they are less likely to define as left wing or right wing or libertarian or socialist, and they're more likely to just be able to identify with a balance of ideas and opinions as well. So that's why we try and explore the common good to make sure that what we see in the sort of public debate of sort of divisive finger pointing politics and the sort of the culture of the other, where it's someone else's fault and this is someone else's problem. The common good is a lens to try and go beyond that and try and think about what works for everyone and what how we can have discussions which don't alienate people and polarize them.
And you've had a lot of experience in the past with sort of developing think tanks, and even before Covey. What do you think are the biggest difficulties in starting an organization, company from the beginning? What are some of the hard parts that you've encountered?
I think one of the recurring themes is reputation, and this is not something that is necessarily just about being in a startup organization. It's just as much a challenge for larger organizations as well. But certainly I found that the challenge in the early days of an organization is being able to build that reputation, grow a reputation so that people do think that you're doing something serious, and it's not another kind of flash in the pan. And maybe that is a little bit sort of bespoke to the world of think tanks and policy and public discussion, because we trade in ideas, and so not being able to have a reputation where people think those ideas are worth listening to and credible is quite a big deal.
And I can imagine that be sort of exacerbated because you're a visual think tank, and it might not be taken as seriously as that 50-page report that you plop down on the desk at the end. It's sort of more of like a continual process, as you're saying. So I can imagine, do you think that it's even more difficult just given the nature of Covey's mission and way of going about it?
Yeah, for some people I think it is. I think they would be looking for ways in which we demonstrate impact and rigor, as well as the ability to share things more widely. But that's something that we try and work into our work. Sometimes, if a project is only supposed to last a couple of months, that you can only go into it in a certain depth. But ideally, we would go into the same amount of rigor as any sort of robust research project elsewhere might do, but do it in a way which kind of reflects the sort of ways in which people want to engage with information. So we don't deliberately not do the 50-page report. In fact, we have done, but it's all about kind of going beyond that and seeing that as the primary goal.
Something that I'm really interested in is just sort of how you manage to delegate as the founder, because I could imagine that there's sort of this responsibility to make sure your vision is realized, because the whole company was your brainchild. So did you find it sort of hard to
relinquish that and be like, okay, you're going to carry forth what Covey's about? Or did you feel a personal obligation to say, okay, this needs to go through me? You know, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, actually, especially because the stage that we're at, even though we're 2 years old, the stage that we're at is still a very much a forming stage. So I think, once things have settled down a bit more and we're more of a stable organisation, you already have a lot of these processes and ideas and ways of working and principles in place.
Yeah.
But because we're still making these up as we go along, I think it does mean a little bit more kind of a sort of oversight from me than it will in future. But ultimately, any organisation is based on its people, and me as one person is not going to get us to where we need to be. And so there is, we do rely on everyone in this organisation to play their part and take full-on responsibility for things, and really help the organisation to get to where we want to go. So in terms of things like some of the processes and some of the everyday stuff, I do probably still need to keep an eye on certain things, but in terms of having responsibility for moving the organisation forward, I think that is something which sort of falls on us all.
Yeah. What do you think are the most positive aspects of starting something sort of completely from your own vision and working at it day after day? It sounds kind of rigorous, but do you think there's some really positive things about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just having the freedom and the creativity to do things, and sometimes do a different thing every day, So something that's common to a lot of startups is one day you're fixing the photocopier, and the next day, or the printer, we don't have a photocopier. And the next day you're sort of, doing some really interesting interviews with someone, and then the next day sitting at the desk, knee deep in research. So that's really exciting, actually. And I think being the founder of that also is something which gives you a lot of kind of creative freedom. So if we have an opportunity to do something quite interesting, and maybe work with a different type of partner organisation or with a consultancy client, then sort of it's nice to just be able to go and do that.
And I'm really interested too in sort of your vision and when you developed it, because Covey works a lot with my generation, Gen Y, and I think something sort of characteristic of that is just a general confusion about what you want to do, what's going to make you happy, make you successful. I'm just really interested about how you sort of gain clarity in your career path. And you described your educational background. Do you think that there was sort of a moment where it clicked, like, this is what I want to do, this is what I'm good at?
No.
Yeah. Is it developing still, you think?
Yeah, I think one issue for sort of a younger generation especially is that we were educated in a world where if you did this degree, or if you did well at school, or if you worked hard at a certain subject or vocation, then this is what you would be, this is what you could expect, this is what you could be rewarded with.
Like a formula.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a legacy from our parents' generation, where people were much more sort of career focused, and once they got a certain job, they would be in that job for the next 50 years. But now we can do anything, and the door is open for most people in terms of having certain opportunities. Obviously, not everyone has the luxury of being able to make certain career choices, but there is a lot more freedom, and there's a lot more sort of openness about what we do in life generally. And I think that's a really it's a massive opportunity, but it's also quite a challenge as well. There are too many options sometimes. And so my reflection was that I never would have thought that I was doing what I would be doing now when I graduated from university. Probably not even a couple of years later. But I think getting stuck into something and working really, really hard on something is all you need to have kind of fulfillment and be able to, you know, look back on that and enjoy it and be successful at something. So I'm not even sure it matters, you know, what it is that we're doing, as long as we're, you know, working really hard and enjoying that work is more important.
That's sort of an enormous relief for me personally to hear, because what you said about just the array of choices, it's sort of debilitating. I find, like, when you're just thinking about all the options, it's just sort of so easy to zero in on one that you think is going to bring you the most money or the most sort of prestige. So I'm interested in sort of your definition of success, which you kind of got at just with the hard work, but do you think that's changed a lot over time, or has it been pretty consistent?
I mean, it's a really, really big question.
That's huge. Looking for the answers.
I think sort of the most obvious answer to me is you know, success is being best in field, you know, top of your game. And so again, it doesn't really matter what that game is, but I think that's quite ambitious. Obviously, that's quite a long-term version of success, and I think you can have shorter term success, which is about, you know, putting effort and hard work into something and seeing that paying off, and that can happen, you know, in a really short period of time. And I think that's what probably, you know, helps make longer term success, just picking those you know, shorter term wins and you know, working really hard at them, and then, you know, building that into kind of a longer term ambition.
So that's so much more manageable if you do that. I know that makes so much sense, and I think that's the only way you can really accomplish anything, because when you think about sort of like the lofty 5-year goals, it just gets to the point where you shut yourself down, because you're like, who am I to accomplish those things when there's so many people? So that's really interesting.
And it goes back to sort of what I was saying about, you know, we get told that we, you know, should be doing certain things and could be doing certain things, and I think everyone should hold those, you know, big aspirations of, I can do anything that I want to do, but if I put in the hard work now. And I think sort of the Gen Y generation does get accused of being sort of, you know, lazy and apathetic a lot, and I don't want to sort of overgeneralize to that extent, but sometimes I think the way that we've, you know, been taught to do things is to sort of make a goal and then it you know, expect it to happen, when actually it's about, you know, putting in the sweat and tears now.
No, that makes sense. Okay, so just changing gears a little bit, I'm just interested in your insight in areas of policy and government, because coming from an American perspective, coming to the UK, I found that there were a lot of really resonant issues that were sort of being experienced by countries all around Europe, you know, with America included. So do you think that there is sort of more commonality than people care to admit in terms of issues that governments are experiencing, or do you feel like there's really quite specific things that to each, you know, country?
No, I think we you know, live in a very kind of global, globalized economy, but global culture as well. I mean, it's hard to be sat in the middle of London, you know, in a kind of capital city cosmopolitan mindset and apply that to, you know, everyone. But you know, certainly from my perspective, I think that there are sort of things which, you know, issues and ties which bind us across the world, and it's not a case of sort of every national society or economy having their own, you know, isolated problems. We the same things are going on in relation to, you know, millennials and housing over in the States as they are over here, and same in, you know, in Sydney, for example. Things like sort of the changing kind of intergenerational relationships, and, you know, caring for elderly people and that sort of thing, you know, do happen across societies and across countries. But I think we could be better at learning from what works elsewhere. I think we've achieved, a level of globalization where we identify across borders and that sort of thing, but we don't seem to learn as much as we could do. So we don't learn as much from things that are working well in other societies, and we always kind of say, but that happens over there because it's a specific situation, and it would be. I think. We could, we being kind of, the information consuming public, could learn a lot more from what works elsewhere.
I think that's something I really realized, especially just from COVID, but coming abroad. I think from an American perspective, you always sort of think of American problems versus the rest of the world. And meeting just people in, countries in Europe and the UK, I've learned that people are pretty similar. There's just so much commonality there. And I feel like that's something that COVID works to really encourage, is just this idea of sort of like the collective, the common good. And that's so productive for fighting bipartisanship, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And it's really sad when you think about people who, there are individuals and groups here around the world, that really do think that their own point of view is something which is particular and bespoke to them, and that other people could never ever see things in the same way. And a lot of the work we do, but a lot of the work that's going on elsewhere as well is about sort of convincing people that's not really possible. We're all human, so there's always going to be something that we have in common with others, and actually most people's ideals of what a kind of good world is are similar. It's just how we get there that differs, and that's why sort of having those conversations is really important.
Do you think that sense of empathy is sort of the most important, maybe not the most important, but right up there, political tool, or just tool in policy that you can have? Because the way you're explaining it now, it just seems like that's sort of that's the deficiency right now. Do you think so? Or
I don't think the politicians themselves would say I lack empathy, and I'm unable to see it but I think the system is something which doesn't often create that space to try and reach beyond your own comfort zone and see the world from the perspective of others, and maybe even have conversations with others who you wouldn't normally speak to. We're set up in a way that deliberately puts people in different categories and in different boxes, and I think the sort of conventional institutional ways of doing things are disintegrating for the reason that people don't do it that way anymore. So there's a lot of opportunity to start to do things differently, and start to build different ways of interacting and having those relationships and those conversations. So I have to ask you, what's next, do you feel like, in your career for COVID? Just what do you see in the next 5 years, the trajectory of where things are going? So for Kobe, we're still a baby organisation. We're still in flux all the time in everything we do, and so I'd like us to get more stable and have an organisation that is seen as it's sort of relating to that definition of success. I want it to be seen as best in class, and an organisation that others aspire to be and are inspired by. So that's where I want to go, and that's going to be quite a lot of sort of further sort of hard work to get there. And that's what I want to be personally. I want to be the founder of a really kind of sustainable organisation that can go on into the future without me one day, and can still be respected and inspirational.
Oh, well, thank you so much for talking, and thank you so much for watching. Again, this is Caroline Macfarland, the director and founder of COVI Common Vision. Ask you, what's next, do you feel like, in your career for COVI? Just what do you see in the next 5 years, the trajectory of where things are going?
So for COVI, we're still a baby organization. We're still, you know, in flux all the time in everything we do, and so I'd like us to get more stable and, you know, have an organization that is, you know, is seen as, it's sort of relating to, you know, that definition of success. I want it to be seen as best in class, and, you know, an organisation that others aspire to be and are inspired by. So that's where I want to go, and that's going to be quite a lot of sort of further sort of hard work to get there. And yeah, that's what I want to be personally. I want to be the founder of a really kind of sustainable organisation that you know, can go on into the future without me one day and can still be respected.
Thank you very much for watching. I will have links to my website and to social media down below. And a big thanks to Caroline Macfarland and all my lovely coworkers at Covey Think Tank.